Hey everyone, it's Alex, and I have an amazing story for you today. I've got the story of just one of these toxic chemicals, and I'm going to start at the beginning. Now, I know that means I'm going to tell you a little history, and that's not the sexiest thing in the world, but I'll keep it brief for you. But the fact is, sometimes you got to learn the facts if you want to be able to separate truth from garbage. So, you're going to want to listen to this one, because by the end of the video, you're going to learn how, if you're an American, this chemical has hurt your brain in a measurable way. That's not just me talking, that's the science. Speaking of which, below the video, there will be links to all the articles, published books, encyclopedia, all the stuff I cite. Just look at the time I say it, and there'll be a link to the right. So the chemical I'm talking about is lead. Now you may know that lead's gotten into our water. Still does sometimes. It's been in our homes. It's gotten into our food. It's even been in some cosmetics. But I think what people kind of forget is how much lead has gotten into our air. So this is the story of tetraethyl-lead, which all happened due to leaded gasoline. Now this is a crazy story because lead was known to be dangerous for a couple hundred years. Benjamin Franklin wrote about it. There was even a law in the 1700s saying you can't use lead to filter your rum. People knew lead was bad for your brain. The League of Nations passed a law against leaded paint in 1923. We knew lead was dangerous. So it's really fucked up that in 1925, a guy by the name of Thomas Midgley got a patent for leaded gasoline. Thomas Midgley is a name you're going to want to remember because this guy has fucked up a lot of stuff. He's the same guy who invented the chlorofluorocarbons that have made a dent in our atmosphere, in our ozone layer. This guy was a scientist, a millionaire. Everyone thought he was a genius. Turns out history is not quite that simple. So this guy Midgley, along with DuPont, a chemical company you might have heard of, and General Motors, all formed this Ethyl corporation to make leaded gasoline. They called it ethyl because people knew lead was dangerous, so they thought the name ethyl sounded safer. That's in 1925. The Surgeon General rightly said, "Hey, is this safe, guys?" And Midgley said, and I quote, "There's no actual experimental data that's been taken. Quote, the average street will probably be so free from lead, it will be impossible to detect it or its absorption," end quote. Turns out he was wrong. Nonetheless, a scientific study was commissioned by the Bureau of Mines. And while that study was going on, something interesting happened. Workers in the factories in New Jersey making this leaded gasoline started having serious health problems. Several went insane, and not just a little crazy, but running around screaming, taken away in straitjackets insane. 5 of them did, and 17 workers died. Kind of a warning sign, don't you think? Nonetheless, the Bureau of Mines study came out after that and said, nope, there's no public risk. Junk science. So the New York Times ran an article with the title, quote, "No peril to public after long experiment with motor exhaust." I can see why people don't trust what they read in the paper these days. I can see why people would be skeptical. I mean, you always have a right to be skeptical. That's one of the lessons here. Just because scientists or people who say they're scientists or say they're experts say it's true doesn't necessarily make it true. So nonetheless, some actual scientists and actual experts who knew lead was dangerous kept complaining about this, and a meeting was called for, and a temporary ban was put on lead. So another junk study was commissioned. This one looked at gas station attendants. And because they didn't see any immediate harmful effects, they concluded lead must be safe. Turns out that's not how lead poisoning works. It's not going to make you die right away unless it's an incredibly high dose, like was happening with the workers in the factories. Smaller doses can give you all sorts of problems over the long term. But they had a bad study, and so in 1926, they declared it safe. And so by the 30s, 70% of the gasoline was leaded. And by the 1970s, 200,000 tons of lead was being put into the air we breathe every year. And all along the way, people were complaining about this. In 1936, the Federal Trade Commission issued a restraining order against the commercial criticism of lead. So, in the end, it took 70 years to undo this damage. And it's still in certain types of airplane fuel called avgas. So 70 years to get lead out of gasoline. But that doesn't mean it's all fixed, because the fact is there's still some in the atmosphere. So now, with our much improved science, we can conclusively show that of those hundreds of thousands of tons of lead that went into the atmosphere, those correlate very well with the amount of lead that's in our blood. And the research shows, shockingly, that that lines up almost perfectly with a loss of IQ. If you're born in America, odds are you lost 5 to 6 IQ points because of the lead that was in gasoline from the 20s through the 70s. Is that not crazy? And here's what's crazy, is there was an alternative this whole time. There was something called an alcohol mix, and they knew about it from the beginning. That was a viable, safe replacement. It just wasn't as profitable. So the lesson here is they tell you it's safe. Can you trust them? In the 1960s, they said that 60 micrograms of lead for every deciliter of blood, that's how they measure your blood level of lead. They said 60 is a safe amount. In the 70s, they said, oh, whoops, it's actually more like 40 is the safe amount. And then they corrected themselves again in the 70s and said, oh, no, it's actually 30. Then in the 80s, they're like, no, it's actually 20 micrograms per deciliter. Small change. 90s, they dropped it down to 10. And today, the CDC says there is no safe level for lead in the bloodstream for children. You think that's crazy? If you look at the research, people have found that the lead poisoning in people's blood, which has come from the air, accounts for a huge amount of violence in America. When you look at the charts, the drop of lead when we took it out of gas might account for up to 50% of the reduction in violent crimes over the last 50 years. Lead relates to ADHD, and it's a really crazy story. And this isn't the only chemical where this has happened, where it got introduced, there was evidence it was dangerous right away, somebody gets rich off it, people might try to sue, and again, somebody tried to sue the lead, somebody tried to warn the lead company, they got sued by the lead company for researching its dangers. A guy named Byers. So it's a really shocking story. And that's just what we know about lead. We don't really understand the human body too well. So, what else could it be affecting? Could it be related to any of these other problems? Hard to say. You don't know what you don't know. And here's what really makes me angry, is that lead is still a problem today. It's still in paint in houses. It's still in pipes like in Flint. It's still used in a lot of other countries. And it's still even in, our atmosphere. Up to 100 tons, I believe, from airplane fuel. That's not okay. And why did I not learn about this in school? I I always thought people who said we're getting poisoned were crazy. But it turns out the ones who think we're not, they're the ones who don't know what they're talking about. Anyways, don't worry if it sounds bleak. In my next video, I'm going to tell you what we can do.